Hello and welcome to the Malika Writes channel. My name is Malika Writes and today I'm going to be talking about love in Middle Earth. I'm also really up close to the camera, so I hope it's not awkward because I'm usually on that side. Today I'm on this side because, as you can see, there is a giant Christmas tree next to me in my usual recording space. So today I'm going to be on this side. I hope that's not too much of a bother. But today we're going to be talking about love. We're going to be talking about romantic love, and we're going to be talking about it and how it shows up in Middle Earth. Of all of the themes that are sort of explored in The Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion and the various other stories that take place in The Lord of the Rings, love is one of those themes that sort of seems obvious and not very developed. And it seems that way because the characters sort of just look at each other and fall in love. And it seems like, okay, yeah, we get it. It's the stereotypical sort of fairy tale love, the love at first sight. I see you once and then that's it. But because it's Tolkien, it's never as it seems on the surface. There's always some great amount of thought put into his work. There's always a deeper understanding that needs to be had. So this is why I'm looking at it. For the sake of the length of this video, I'm just going to focus on romantic love, because if we had to look at friendship, we'd be looking at characters like Samwise Gamgee and Beleg Strongbow, which require their own video. We'd also be looking at sort of parent to child love. We'd be looking at characters like Fëanor and Finwë, and they also deserve their own video. So I'm going to be focusing mainly on couples today. And the first sort of couple that we're going to look at is in the Silmarillion, because I believe that some of the more interesting couples for me are in the Silmarillion. This is not to say that I don't love Arwen and Aragorn and Faramir and Éowyn, just to name a few of the couples. But I think that when it comes to couples that don't necessarily get the most analysis, they're in the Silmarillion. And that is because in the Silmarillion we're sort of just told that people got married, or that these were married couples. We didn't really get to see their courtship like we do in the later parts of the Silmarillion with Beren and Luthien. We sort of just know that these two characters are married. So the first couple that we sort of run into are Vada and Manue. So the first thing that Tolkien sort of does with the Valar is establish who they are as individuals, but when we meet them we know that they're a couple. So Manwe and Vada are sort of the ruling couple of all of the Valar, and what we're told is that when Vada is with Manwe he could see further, and when Manwe is with Vada she can hear further. By doing this, Tolkien sort of establishes the upsides of marriage. You're supposed to complement each other and improve each other, but you're still individuals in your own right. So they don't become a monolith just because they're married. They're still two people with very distinct powers and very distinct roles and purposes within the wider function of Middle Earth. So the next couple that we sort of run into, and this is the couple that we actually get an insight into their marriage. In fact, we get an argument between the two of them. So we come into their marriage through an argument. And so this story takes place as the creation story of the dwarves and the Ents. What we have in this same story is an example of parental and to child love with Eru and Aule, but we're not going to explore that in its totality today. I'm just going to mention it because it's important for this discussion. So when Aule creates the dwarves, Yavanna becomes worried because the dwarves will be like their dad and cut stuff down to make new stuff, and they're going to cut down her trees in particular. She's really concerned about her trees because of all of her creations. Her trees are the ones that she loves the most. She goes to Manue for counsel, but she doesn't betray Aule. She doesn't tell Manue what Aule has done because he told her in confidence. So there's still, despite the fact that he has created something that's going to destroy something she loves, she's not, trying to get him back. She's not trying to get one up on him. So there's that definite care between the couple. So this love that we see between them is enough that they do not betray each other's confidence. So what is interesting about this is the fact that Tolkien has decided to give us a peep into their marriage through this disagreement. Obviously, as a story device, it's conflict, which is interesting in any story. It's also going to drive the plot forward because we get the creation of the dwarves and we get the creation of the Ents, who will play significant roles in the later tales. So what is interesting is that they have created two things that will always be opposed to each other. Aule has created the dwarves and Yavanna creates the Ents, who will protect the forests from not just the dwarves, but from elves and even from men as well, who will come later. To me, this brings to mind the biblical story of Adam and Eve, and you may be like, okay, how? But in the Bible, Eve is called a helpmate, but that's a sort of vague translation of the actual Hebrew, which translates to a helper against you. Opposition is not the absence of love. In our modern age, any sort of opposition is met with, well, you don't love me, you're clearly a hater. That's not the case. So opposition is not the absence of love. In fact, it's a tool for growth. And we see this in almost every other area of life. Any conflict is an opportunity for something to be made anew, for something to experience some growth. And that's what we have here. So when Yavanna creates the Ents, she tells Aule there shall walk a power in the forests whose wrath they shall arouse at their peril. And Aule responds, nonetheless, they will have need of wood. Even the Valar have arguments. So what's the purpose of this argument and what does it tell us about love and relationships? Aule creates something wonderful. Some of the best characters in The Lord of the Rings, hands down, are the dwarves. But Yavanna puts a restraint on this creativity. In my Hercules video, I spoke about the fact that Megara prevents Hercules from becoming a god, from assuming that god status. And she doesn't do this by, chaining him down. It's his love for her that prevents him from going to Mount Olympus and staying there where he would be separated from her. In the Hercules story, the Disney version, he achieves that godlike status, but he gives it up in order to be with Megara. So in doing this, he limits his potential. He stops being a god and goes back to being a hero, which is something that almost anyone could achieve, but difficulty. But he's not a god. He doesn't explore his potential to the fullest extent. Yavanna acts in the same way. Aule is kind of deliberately described as the only other Valar who is similar to Melkor, the main villain. And Tolkien does this for a reason. If we look at Saruman and Sauron, they had one thing in common. They both worked for Aule at one point. So Tolkien is really trying to drive home the point that Aule is similar to Melkor. He's just the Melkor that listens. So Aule is also the only other Valar to kind of directly disobey Eru. Aule creates dwarves, living things, and that was to create a living thing like that was supposed to be the power of only Eru. So in doing this, like Hercules, he achieves a godlike status. Yavanna acts like Megara as a resistance to that. However, because of the Christian themes in Tolkien's works, it's not Yavanna who acts as the main restraint, but Eru himself. So Eru is the main restraint on Aule's power, which from a secular point of view, you could read that as Aule's own morality. His ethos restrains him. We see the same in the relationship between Nerdanol and Feanor later in the Silmarillion. She's similar to him, but more wise, less temperamental, less murderous. And she's explicitly said to have restrained his fire, and he would take counsel from practically no one else but her. However, because Feanor's own moral compass was a little bit off kilter, if the kinslaying at Aquilonde is anything to go by, she couldn't restrain him for very long. So what does this sort of say? In other words, if a man doesn't have an ethos that restrains him, a woman won't be able to do much with him for very long. People aren't put on this earth to sort of control each other. You have to control yourself. And because Feanor didn't have that self-control, Nerdanol could only restrain him for a few years, and then they became estranged, which is really sad because they obviously loved each other a lot to have 7 children. That number of children is actually very rare for the elves. So the fact they had that many children tells you that they loved each other very much. So it's sad that their relationship broke up, and I actually really like their dynamic. We're not given much of it, but we can sort of imagine what their relationship would have been like. But it's kind of sad that that relationship broke up, but that is a consequence of when one half of a relationship is not doing things to improve themselves, for themselves, and not for other people. As the story progresses, what we come across is this courtship relationship, and this happens for 2 reasons. As from the historical point of view, Tolkien is now moving forward in time, so he's coming essentially to his own sort of Middle Ages period of his story, where the kingdoms have been set up, the main parts of the story have been defined, and we have Beren and Luthien meeting at sort of this crossroad. So, at this crossroad of storytelling, So, when it comes to their courtship relationship, in the Middle Ages and real life, courtship or courtly love was very much emphasized. So this whole story of courtship would have made sense for the particular time period. The second reason why I think Tolkien decided to focus on courtship is because we have had essentially the marriage aspect of it. So now Tolkien is sort of exploring different relationships, exploring different ways of coming into a relationship, which we previously haven't had. Beren and Luthien's story it's not completely sweet and everything, but it's a little sort of gap in the world. It's a little safe haven. If we look at Doriath as a place, it's situated in the girdle of Melian. So it's this sort of little haven within the tumultuous world. And we have this great love taking place. So it's the perfect place for a relationship to develop, for a love, for courtship to happen. So what we have in almost parallel to this is Eorl and Eredhil's relationship, which also sort of happens in a sort of reverse Doriath, where it's dark, it's constantly in twilight. She has to sort of forsake the sun to be with him. She doesn't mind him that much, so she gets married to him, and they have a son who ends up being the downfall of Gondolin. So what we can see from Beren and Luthien's relationship is not the stereotypical courtship story. In fact, what we have is Luthien actually assisting Beren. For the most part, she saves him from the brink of death. She brings back his soul by singing to Mandos. She also sings to Melkor in order to give Beren enough time to steal the Silmaril. So they are working collaboratively to bring about this task in order for them to, and in order for the reward, which is for them to be married. So it's not the sort of typical courtship story where the woman sort of stays behind, and it's more akin to that collaborative effort that we see with the later marriages. When we look at Feanor and Nerdanol's relationship, both of them are said to be very skilled. Both of them are kind of equals in a way. So that's the same relationship that we get with Beren and Luthien. And it's also kind of the same relationship that we get with Eel and Redhill. But the difference is that Eel doesn't want opposition. He doesn't want there to be a pushback against what he's doing. He doesn't want a Redhill to be his equal. He kind of just wants to keep her in this little bubble that he's created. He even hates the Noldor, and she's one of the Noldor, and he asks her to sort of forsake her people in order to be with him. And this causes the longing that she has and why she misses home and why she and Maeglin end up running away. So what we get is not a direct parallel between the two of them, but close enough that we're able to see the right way to have a relationship and the wrong way to have a relationship. So another thing I just wanted to point out with that whole courtship thing is we get Luthien and Celegorm, which it doesn't end well for Celegorm, because he doesn't court Luthien, he just straight up kidnaps her. He tricks her and kidnaps her, and that is how Huan ends up helping Luthien. So that's another example of how not to court someone. Don't kidnap them, because that's not going to work very well. I know there are a lot of fan fictions out there in which people seem to like being kidnapped by an incredibly handsome man, but trust me, that never ends well. That's going to end with a case. So when we look at all of these relationships and what they tell us about love in Tolkien's world, as we've come to see, it's a lot more complex. It's not just they met, they saw each other for the first time, and that was it. Even with the Beren and Luthien story, Beren has to chase this girl for what seems like a year, you know, from spring to spring. He has to chase her for a very long time in order for her to even consider him. She runs away from him. She spends a lot of time running away from him, and he spends a lot of time enduring the elements just to see this woman. So there's a lot of chasing going on in that courtship scene. It's not straightforward. They saw each other and fell in love. We also get some of the archetypal differences between men and women in the Beren and Luthien story. For example, Beren sees Luthien's beauty and falls in love with her. Luthien observes his chase, observes his dedication, the fact that last spring she ran away from this guy and this spring he's still here. That's dedication. So she sees that, and she sees his bravery and determination, and she almost falls in love with that. There is a hint of fate there. You know, it says, and doom fell on to Nuviel, that in his arms lay glistening. So there is a hint of fate driving this, but for the most part there is the proactive action of the two characters. And even before they get married, that initial attraction that they have to each other is put to the test with the trials that they have to go through before they get married. One thing I love about their story is that they don't see each other and get married immediately, which is the typical fairy tale. They have to go through trials together. They almost have to go through marriage counselling activities together. That would be pretty epic if for every marriage counselling they made you guys fight a demon lord and steal jewels from your ancestors from his crown. You know, that would be cool. But they do have to go through some significant trials to be together. It's not now they're married and they have to fight the world. They do have to almost prove their love for each other in these activities. And that's one of the things that we see in not just with Beren and Luthien. We also see that with Aragorn and Arwen later on. Even though Arwen's story, Arwen's role in the Lord of the Rings seems sort of passive, but it's not. Her decision to stay, knowing that the world is what it is at that point. Sauron looks very much like he's going to win the war. Her decision to stay and not to sail into the West is a big sacrifice on her part. Another one of the major couples, and perhaps my favourite couple after Yavanna and Aule and Nerdanor and Feanor. So this is probably my competing for second place. Sometimes they move up to first place. You know, it interchanges depending on my mood and the day. But one of my favourite couples is Arundel and Elwing. Those two, for me, their dedication to each other, her decision to go with him into the into Valinor, even knowing that this could be the death of both of them, his determination to vouch for elves and men and the other free people of Middle-earth, to me that is almost it's a mirror to the Beren and Luthien story. Even though they are a married couple with children, Elros and Elrond, but their decision to almost sacrifice everything, for me, puts them up there. They even, you know, have to leave their children behind, which is a very tough decision. A lot of people have talked about this and said, oh, why did Elwing not just give up the jewel to save her kids? If you think about it this way, Elwing at that point probably didn't know that her children were still alive. At the point where she's on the cliff, she probably doesn't know where her kids are. She probably thinks they're dead because the Noldor slaughtered majority of the people at the Havens. So Elwing is standing there with this jewel and they're confronting her and telling her to give it up. She, at that point, was probably thinking, you've taken what I love from me, so I'm going to take what you love from you. And she jumps off the cliff with the jewel, which, I don't know. I'm pretty sure that's a decision most people would take in that situation. I'm pretty sure most people wouldn't give up the jewel at that point. So Maglor and Maedhros find the twins later on. They're not dead, but I don't think Elwing would have known that at that time. I don't think she knew she was going to be turned into a bird and be able to meet her husband. So for me, she is a character that I completely sympathise with, and I really love her character arc and her strength, and yeah, just her level of commitment to doing the right thing. Because I think jumping off the cliff with that jewel was the right thing. If you were to kill someone I loved and ask me for your stuff back, yep, I'm dying with your stuff. So I really like her as a character, but her story mirrors Luthien's story, and it just kind of makes sense that Luthien is also her grandmother. So without sounding too much like your primary school teacher, what have we learnt today? We have learnt that Tolkien is a genius. We knew this already, but with every video I kind of just confirmed this to myself. His subtle ways of hiding his messages, not really hiding them, but just subtly putting them in there, really shines through, and going through his stories and digging them out and looking at the different relationships and seeing that they're not just more than the one sort of sentence he put them in the page. There's a lot more to them. We could obviously talk about Galadriel and Celeborn, but I've talked about them a million times, so I wanted to talk about some different couples today. And I really love the way that he was able to show so many different sides of relationships, not with just one couple, but with so many different couples. So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today. I'm going to talk about friendship, and I'm going to talk about parent to child love, because I do think he explores both of them brilliantly. I think one of his best explorations of love is probably friendship, because we see that with Samwise and Frodo, and we see that even with Merry and Pippin, and we see it with Gandalf and Bilbo and the dwarves. It's everywhere. Friendship is almost what drives this story. As somebody who went to war, Tolkien would have been very familiar with that whole comrade relationship and having to rely on friends and people that you knew. I hope this video has been interesting. I hope that you're looking forward to the others. I hope I didn't ramble on too much. I know I have a tendency to ramble. But I hope that it wasn't too much for you guys. I hope this new angle wasn't bad either. I'm sort of stretching over the Christmas tree in order for you guys to see me. My hip is probably going to kill me all day, but anything for you guys. So thank you so much for watching this video. This has been the Malika Writes channel.